So a little background on me. I work for Hyperledger, and my background is in cryptography and blockchain. And so you might be wondering, why am I speaking about the metaverse? Why is someone with this background here today? And it turns out there are a lot of problems in the metaverse where the ideal solution is based in cryptography or blockchain. And today we're going to be talking about authentication, so this will mostly be about cryptography. So what is authentication? You all have probably seen this comic about on the internet, Nobody Knows You're a Dog. So the fundamental question is, how do we know who you say you are and that you have the permissions to do what you say? I know Sam gave a talk earlier today on identity, and authentication is very close to identity, and authentication can sort of be seen as, proving facts about identity. So what I will not talk about today is linking you to your cell phone or your computer. So, I'm defining a person as essentially a cell phone or computer. And, this is a hard problem, but it's a problem that is much broader than the metaverse. And today I wanted to talk about metaverse specific stuff as much as possible. So why do we need authentication? Well, we need to show we have access to certain things, or we have ownership of digital goods. And you can probably come up with other reasons, but I think these are the two major ones that we want to consider. So if we have a centralized metaverse, authentication is very easy, right? The central authority can just maintain a database of all of the access privileges or tokens or whatever you want here. And so here I've just sort of listed 4 things as a hypothetical example. But if we decentralize the metaverse, things become harder. So here's a hypothetical decentralized metaverse with 3 different areas. I'll probably get in trouble for that, but that's okay. So if we have a decentralized metaverse, then we have to include a lot of different things in addition to sort of our basic information, right? We may need to know an issuer, we may need to know a point of issuance, and this would not be in a centralized database probably. It might be the case that none of these metaverse areas have all of this information. It may be stored in a distributed way in the different areas, and probably my wallet, which Kalia and some others talked about earlier. So this does get complicated, right? So for the purposes of discussion, let's assume there are Hyperledger discussion rooms in both the treat territories and Daniela's dungeon. Do the treat territories honor access privileges given in Daniela's dungeon? And if so, how does this work, right? This is an interesting question for decentralization and authentication in the metaverse. So to think about this, let's think about real world authentication problems, right? Authentication in today's world isn't perfect, but it sort of works, right? Passport. I am authorized to enter the US, but I'm also authorized to visit other countries in certain circumstances, right? There's a system where other countries will respect this passport. I am authorized to possess this car, right? Other states will look at this, well, it's not anymore because it's expired, this car registration, and say, hey, you do own this car. And there are authentication mechanisms that sort of go with this, right? These may not be the best, as we'll see. You can probably clone this key pretty easily, but,
Particularly that key.
Yes, particularly that key. But yeah, so, I can have an authentication mechanism showing that I am authorized to enter a bar. And, I could go to Texas and use this, and, well, they'll hopefully let me in the bar. But this can be hard today, right? Has anyone seen any of these books before? So, I don't know what a Wyoming or a Montana or a Louisiana ID looks like. And, if you go to bars and you're young, then they might pull out this book on you. And this brings to this fun question. Would you accept this ID? Who thinks this was a real ID and who thinks this is a fake ID? Well, who thinks this is a real ID? Who thinks it's a fake ID? Some? Yeah, it is actually a real ID, but that lots of people thought otherwise. What? Yeah, well, it's expired anyway, so. And then, we have even sort of less secure authentication, right? This is I can attend LF conferences, but right, look, we could have all copied this and, and filled in the entries, and people have done this. So, we would want better solutions in practice for this. So one of the key points to take away from this is all of these credentials, they adhere to some format and they're honored by different institutions. And so I know everyone and their brother has talked about this today, but we do need some kind of agreements and standards for many things in the metaverse, and authentication is no exception. Another point is, obtaining credentials from any of these parties may be difficult and time consuming. You all have probably had wonderful experiences at the DMV. So when possible, we'd like to be able to reuse these credentials, right? If I get a credential from one authorized person, then hopefully other authorized people will respect that, right? This is kind of how it works with KYC today. We have some problems, right? So counterfeiting physical goods is usually hard. I know everybody knows the fake Rolex story, but counterfeiting digital goods is sometimes quite easy, right? We need really strict authentication, as alluded to in this story about the quote unquote NFT heist of the century. Copy paste. So let's talk about a hypothetical example. So suppose our 3 metaverse areas agree to mutually accept each other's, users and verifications. So how would we handle this digitally? Any ideas? No, nobody wants to say anything? Okay. Simpler, digital signatures, right? We just have digital signatures, right? You can just sign. And you're probably wondering, why did I put this incredibly formal definition of digital signature on the slide for you? Has anybody ever seen this style of cryptographic definition before? Yeah, well, I hope so. So the key point here is this game, basically, right? This is the security game for a digital signature. And what it basically says is that, if we have an adversary that can get, whatever messages signed at once, it still shouldn't be able to forge a signature on a new message, right? And this is kind of the case for authentication, right? If I can see authentications in progress, right? Even if that's the case, I shouldn't be able to obtain the user's credentials and spoof authentications, right? And if you go back to my car key example, right? That's probably not something that the car key would defend against, right? The car key, if you, see it close enough, or, some of these early remote car protocols used very insecure, the clickers were, if you could record the radio signal of a clicker, you could just unlock the car yourself. So that's not very good. And that's, something that we want to avoid. So, we just use basic authentication, right? The Daniela's dungeon area could sign, a message of a given form. And if the treat territories had the verification key for Daniela's dungeon, well, they could grant access, right? And so what have we done here? Well, we've just reinvented certificate authorities, right? And this is sort of what these basic systems do. This is what, blockchain systems without advanced identity solutions do, is they just use, things like certificate authorities. But there's some problems here, right? So I'm probably comfortable letting a customs officer see my full passport or a bartender see my driver's license, but I don't want these in the public digital space, right? And I have been careful, throughout the presentation to sort of hide any interesting or non-public information that people might be able to, use from my credentials. And sort of the question is, would you be okay if the bartender photocopied your driver's license and then sold the photocopy to whoever wanted it, and maybe with your bar tab receipt stapled to it too, right? And this is what's going to happen in the metaverse without good authentication systems. This already happens today on some social networks. So, ideally, this isn't something we want in the future. So I know Sam talked about this, but this is also important in authentication as well as identity, is this concept of selective disclosure, right? So the basic idea is to reveal only what you need to show in order to prove authorization for something, right? So what really matters here? Well, the relevant numbers on the driver's license are appropriate, right? My birthday needs to be, before today's date minus 21 years. The license number needs to be valid. The license needs to be not expired. And maybe some of the identifying information should remain public, right? Maybe you want to know my height and my weight and my hair color and my picture, but you don't need to know my name. You don't need to know that I wear contacts, or really anything else on here. So, what I said earlier and that I had signed was that I have authorization from Daniela's dungeon area to enter the Hyperledger discussion room. But what I really want to show is that I, like some person in the network, have authorization from some organization that has the appropriate permissions to enter the discussion room, right? This is what I really want to show. So the idea is zero knowledge proofs. And so before I present a technical slide, I want to go over a basic idea, right? So a zero knowledge proof is just a way to prove that I'll call it a solution to a problem without revealing any information about the solution. So who here has seen zero knowledge proofs before? Who is comfortable with this definition of zero knowledge proofs? Awesome. So I will say, if you really want to understand privacy and confidentiality in decentralized networks like blockchain and the metaverse, then you need to be a little comfortable with this definition. You don't necessarily need to understand the math behind how some of these constructions work. But this sort of explains what you get out of zero knowledge proofs. So forgive me for being slightly technical here, but a zero knowledge proof, in this definition anyway, is a language L, a member M, and a witness W. And the basic idea is a zero knowledge proof allows us to prove that some member M is in a language L without revealing anything about W. And so that can seem awfully abstract and complicated at first, but the classic example is this four-colorable graph problem. So the language could be the set of all graphs that are four-colorable, right? Are people here familiar with graphs? I'm seeing some nods. Right? And a member, so something that is in the set, would be a four-colorable graph, right? And a witness would be a four-coloring of the graph, right? So a zero-knowledge proof for graph coloring, which is sort of one of the iconic zero-knowledge proofs, would allow a prover with a four-coloring to prove that the graph is four-colorable without revealing any information about the coloring itself. So, this is sort of just, I like to use this example and think of this example as sort of what exactly you get, because you have to be very careful with what you argue with zero-knowledge proofs. So how would this work in practice, right? So I could have a signature, right, from the Daniela's dungeon area that Hart has permission to enter the discussion room, right? And then I could encrypt it, right? And so the zero-knowledge language here would be encryptions under Hart's public key of the message concatenated with the signature. And then I could prove this in zero knowledge. Excuse me. And then this is, abstractly, this is what's called a proof of knowledge of a signature, right? And if we publish this, right, well, we're not really hiding anything. And if you're familiar with ZK rollups on blockchain, anybody? This is kind of the idea of a ZK rollup is, we can compress things if we have a succinct zero knowledge proof. So if we have a snark or a stark or something, then this is a useful technique. But what we really want to do is to reveal less information. So let's change our zero knowledge language, right? So instead of saying, well, encryption's signed by the Daniela's dungeon area, what if we say the encryptions are signed by some party that has authorization, right? And I don't want to get too detailed on how we would exactly do this, but I will tell you it works, right? We can also prove this in zero knowledge. And this time, if we publish the ciphertext, the proof, and the relevant public keys, then there's no information on who signed M, right? So now, it's much harder to trace. More privacy is preserved, and I could do the same thing with, my username, right? I could say, well, I'm some user, presumably, right? And this is how we could have more privacy-preserving authentication systems in the metaverse. So even with zero-knowledge proofs, though, all is not well. This is a favorite slide of mine. Does anybody know what this is? Yeah, this is a credit card bill. This is my credit card bill from February, maybe 4 years ago. And this is anonymous, right? So let's see what we can learn, right? So in 2018, I have a bunch of purchases from a snack machine in the South Bay, right? You can probably guess I work in the South Bay, right? I'm somewhere near San Jose. There's a Sunnyvale Mediterranean restaurant that's also fishy. There's a corporate catering in Sunnyvale, so you can probably start to guess where I work. Then you see, well, I bought gas and groceries in Redwood City, so I probably have some tie there, right? Why am I paying the Stanford gym? Then I'm going to a gastropub, right? Well, you probably guess I live in Redwood City again. And based on this Uber pattern, you can probably assume I didn't drive. Why? Well, I probably had some beverages at the gastropub. So, just from these transactions, you learned a lot, right? You learned I lived in Sunnyvale. I worked in Redwood City. I have some connection to Stanford. I probably enjoy a good beverage. And this might not totally de-anonymize me, but if you had the transactions for a whole month, you could probably pinpoint me pretty exactly. And this didn't really buy me much, right? So, even if I'm, doing all this, stuff in zero knowledge and doing fancy privacy properties, I do need to still be careful to rotate my identity and take extra steps to make sure, I'm just not totally de-anonymized. So again, we need to be able to do things in an uncorrelatable way. I believe it was Ori, I think, who mentioned earlier about how some things you want to be correlated for reputation systems, and some you don't want correlated. For authentication, probably most of the time you don't want things to be correlated, right? You're not really building up a reputation. Maybe there are some things that you want to, but in general, you probably don't want correlation. And we're not inherently ruling out tracking, right? These metaverse areas could require all of your personal information if they wanted, but of course, you should have the choice not to visit. There's also some other issues that I'm not really even going to be able to talk about today. How do we handle revocation? So what if I channeled Kanye West and said some offensive things? How would you revoke my credentials? And particularly with respect to decentralization, right? This is easy if there's a central authority in the metaverse, right? And they say, you're gone. But if I use offensive language in treats territories, how will this get reflected to my credentials on the other areas in the metaverse? So, I'll conclude by saying there are tons of interesting challenges on authentication in the metaverse, particularly if we think about efficiency and privacy. As I said, maximally efficient authentication in a privacy-preserving manner. There's lots of regulation and laws that have to be followed, and that's going to be a really, really interesting thing to look at. I'm certainly not an expert there. And finally, as everyone has said, I'll say it again, and consortium and standards building are a big issue for literally everything we've talked about today. We'll need agreements that both metaverse providers and real-world businesses will have to agree to follow. And so that's it. Happy to answer any questions.
Thanks for the presentation. So following up on your example of not being comfortable sharing the driver license with the bartender, I'm with you on that. But on the metaverse, the other hand, I was very comfortable uploading my passport to the United website for pre-boarding. So in the metaverse, it's going to become a bit more challenging to tell who I'm comfortable sharing with and who I'm not.
Yeah, absolutely.
About how this is going to unfold.
Yeah, this has to be some kind of like fine-grained policy, right? Presumably United agreed not to share your passport with anyone else, right?
Yeah, but I can readily.
The governments, but not, third party.
Yeah, but I can easily tell who's who in the physical world because a shady bartender is different than United.com. But on the metaverse, I think it's going to learn a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. It's not going to be easy, right? And there are going to have to be rules on how information spreads, right? Or if they're not rules, then you're going to have to make an educated decision. Should I give this information for this benefit or should I not, right? Presumably, you could also show your passport to the United desk if you didn't want to upload it in advance, right?
Yeah, but I have to say I'm an average, reasonable person. I prefer
Sure.
comfort over hypersecurity. So again, in the physical world, I kind of have that feeling of who to trust and who not to trust. But on the metaverse, I think we need to have mechanisms for, like those, signed certificates that we have on top of websites saying, okay, that was signed by a certificate, I trust this, and this one doesn't have it, so I don't trust it.
Yeah, I mean, I think I think metaverse providers are going to have to say, they're going to have to publicly say, this is the information we share, this is the information we don't share, this is who we share the information with, right? And then you could, you wouldn't have to, but you could look at that and make an informed decision about whether you wanted to sort of participate, right? The name of the game is you trade your privacy for something, right? With the United website, you trade it for the convenience, right? Of getting, pre-approved or, not having to go to the desk, right? But you do get something for that. So, in general, you just want to decide, is the trade-off worth it?
Do you think that, it's very interesting, we're talking about the difference between physical world and metaverse world. Do you think the policies that we have in regulations we have in the physical world is going to apply in the meta world, or it's going to be a different set of policies?
Well, I think they will apply, but I think we'll have sort of new and stricter policies, right? Just because it's much easier to disseminate data. Look at GDPR, right? That's much, much, much stricter. And it might be hard to build a metaverse that complies with GDPR, simply because some of the rules are so strict and some of the rules are a little bit nebulous.
So this is just out of my wheelhouse kind of question, but is the school of thought with identity generally within cryptography to be decentralized or centralized, or is it a battle that's going on?
Well, it depends on what you need, right? So decentralization is ideal, right? So the less you trust, sort of the better, or the more decentralized the trust is usually the better. But you pay for that in terms of efficiency, right? Generally when you centralize things, they become more efficient. When you decentralize things, you have better trust properties, but they're less efficient, right? So when you're thinking about, building a system, you want to think about, what do I trust? Who do I trust? In some cases, there is a natural central authority, right? In that case, you don't need decentralization. But in many cases, there isn't, or there isn't someone, one single entity that everyone trusts. So it's a continuum, and there's no right or wrong answer. It just depends on the application. For some applications, there are definitely right and wrong answers. But in general, it depends on your trust environment.
Yeah, I want to maybe add another point to this that may not be quite discussed. So we were talking about the example of United and why you want to disclose information to them or something like that. But there's another reason we may have omitted too frequently. It's also that one entity who cares who has But if it's a purely, strictly decentralized and there's no authority, then the other party you're interacting with have to know quite a lot about you too, and they don't care. And that will be the kind of people you would trolls and other things we would feel that's potentially even harder problem. And so for that reason, we may have to compromise as well.
Can you define decentralized?
In what context? Sure. I mean, I have it in, I had it in a presentation you sat in at Global Forum. So,
That was like a month ago,
come on. Yeah, so there are a number of ways you can define it. In general, it's the degree. So I like to define it in a min entropy way, which is the largest sort of degree of control that any single party has. There are other ways you can define it, like you're probably familiar with the Nakamoto coefficient. That's another way to define decentralization. That it's a very useful one. In that case, it's the number of parties that it would take to control any one system or any one organization. So there is no single definition of decentralization, right? It's like in mathematics. There's no single definition of a norm, right? There are many different norms. So I'll give you back a troll answer for that.
So in the physical world, we kind of have, and you went over this, but different levels of identity, right? We have the level, using your car example, we have a key. That's relatively low security, but day to day it kind of works. But if you get pulled over by a police officer, you're going to need 3 or 4 forms of identification.
Yep.
Different things like that. Do you foresee there being some kind of different levels in the metaverse as well, or in the digital world?
Yeah, absolutely. I think Melanie was alluding to this earlier that, right, if you're moving above $10,000, there's going to be a different system than, moving below $10,000, right? And you want this naturally, right? If you're buying a coffee, you want a different level of security than if you're buying a house, right? And you're willing to pay more for the house transaction, and you're willing for that to be slower, right? Whereas you're probably not willing to wait on a transaction for coffee. So yeah, I think there will be lots of different levels of security, and this will come along with privacy and authentication as well, right? I may not need to reveal anything about my identity to buy a coffee, right? I hope I shouldn't, other than that I can pay. But if I want to buy a house or I want to buy security or something else, then I may need to prove other things about myself. So absolutely. Any other questions? I think we're down to about a minute, and I do not want to make you all late for your 6th Street margaritas. But yeah, I'll be here for the rest of the conference. I think we have a birds of a feather at the bitter end on Wednesday. And I'm happy to talk in the meantime. So thanks a lot.